Santa Monica College, formerly from Cal Poly. I've been teaching economics for 30 years. Started out in the State University system in New York, then went to small liberal arts college, then to the State University system in California, and now I'm at a community college. And unless I'm misremembering it, this is one of the best experiences that I'm having thus far. This is my second year at Santa Monica College. I teach to a relatively diverse body of students, demographically diverse, skills diverse, internationally diverse. So sometimes there are challenges there, and sometimes those challenges are actually what makes it very exciting. So what I guess I will get started here. I think that what I mean by the module approach will probably unfold as we do it. It is teaching in smaller pieces, but it goes deeper into those smaller pieces. So these are my instructional planning words, and I'm not going to go through them all. What I really mean by them is that when I look at my teaching and I feel good about my teaching and I feel excited about teaching, these are usually the words that I put alongside it. Now, the engaging is probably not totally up to me. I'd like to think I'm engaging, but I think the other things are things that are within my control. And when I feel good about something and leave it and then come back and reflect on it, I usually see a majority of those characteristics. In terms of my instructional planning images, this is a major one for me. It's really a trajectory. And that is I'm trying to get someplace, but it's not always a straight line. And what I discovered about my teaching is that I went on tangents a lot, but when I went on tangents, everyone stopped what they were doing, and they started paying attention, and they were engaged. And so I thought, well, that's information to me. Actually, these tangents might be something that I incorporate into my teaching. And as long as I ultimately get back to where I want to get, it doesn't matter if it's an elliptical, if I take a few spins around, or if I go there much more directly. And the other part of my instructional planning is just flexibility. And that's flexibility for me in terms of my instructional planning so that I don't freak out when things don't actually go the way that I plan them. I can sort of change things midstream if something's not working. And so I guess those are my two images that I take away with me. Today I'll be looking at my module on education and employment. And most of this module I do in my Principles of Macro class, and I have 3 different sizes. One's about 25, and that is a scholar section, and the normal or the regular size is about 42 to 45, and then the largest size is about 82. And I pretty much teach in the same way in all 3, right? Best practices, and just try to elevate those best practices to meet the larger class size. Right, there are some slides in here not for me to necessarily go through, but for you to look at later. Because this PowerPoint presentation has active links in. So if you want to go to where I am, you'll be able to do that, but just not in this version of the presentation. So I don't think I have to go through all of those. So here's a place that I would start. This is a St. Louis Fed. This is the Econ Lowdown, and this is one of their modules. And what's interesting about their modules is they have pre-test, they have post-test, which you can't see here because I cut it off. And then they have a lot of activities in between that students go through. This is also in smaller chunks, so it's the smaller chunks inside the smaller chunks. And students get to revisit what it is they're supposed to learn as they're going through the Econ Lowdown. So this is really going to introduce them to the relationship between unemployment and income. And that's their starting point. Feedback on all the Fed stuff, all the St. Louis Fed stuff is really positive with students, both on my on-ground classes and in my online classes. So in going through employment and income, this is one of the graphs that actually the Fed looks at, but you can also get this directly from Bureau of Labor Statistics. And essentially, we all know what this is designed to show. It's designed to show how unemployment rates decrease at higher levels of educational attainment, and how earnings increase at higher levels of educational attainment. This is interesting to students because, of course, they're in education because they're interested in getting good jobs and getting well paid, so they'll pay attention. They might have some questions, what's a professional degree, hey, and why are those professional degrees, outpacing in terms of earnings the PhDs? So those could be little things that you can focus on. But this is the initial way of having them revisit what they did in the Econ Lowdown, but also the beginning of understanding this looks like correlation, but ultimately we're going to make it more cause and effect relationships, right? And that's our beginning of starting to talk about the cause and effect. Then we move on, and I don't know if you've seen or know about Enrico Moretti, but in his new geography of jobs, this is going to be just a short video clip, I think it's 8 minutes, that he talks about his new geography of jobs, and basically what he looks at is the different innovative, highly educated hubs across the US, and then those that are sort of much less educated and approximate more kind of the third world country hubs within the US. So right after they've kind of learned that there are positive returns to education in terms of employment and in terms of earnings, then we come upon this, and it's, but it's not really that equal. Geographical location matters. If you take your education and yourself with all of your merit and all of your individual attributes and you decide to locate in Merced, California, your returns are going to be much lower than if you decide to locate in Austin, Texas, or San Francisco, or Alexandria, Virginia. All right, and that's a locational issue. And so that's what he brings up. And so that's what I talk about. If someone else wanted to take him a little bit further, you could, if you were doing this for micro, you could do the human capital, externalities, looking at the aggregation of schooling in a particular area and how that changes those individual returns. You could look at, halo effects, so looking at something like, Apple in the Bay Area maybe has 13,000 jobs, but there are 70,000 jobs that come out of the 13,000 that are related to that. That's not something that I do, but it's something that one could do. I could also take this, and in my inequality class, I can go straight into inequality, looking at inequality across the US, and starting it in a way that's not confrontational, which is geographical location, right? No one has an issue with that. But if you start with gender or ethnicity or race, it becomes just a little bit more politically charged. And then if you wanted to, you could even introduce like Easterly's match effects, which have a slightly different outcome than this might have if you're going more into macro. I put this one in here because I sort of found it interesting. I don't know if you're familiar with Richard Florida. I don't necessarily take it in this direction, but Richard Florida was one of the sort of the big creative economies. We need to educate everyone for the creative economies. This is where the future is. This is where the future of jobs are. These are the hubs. And now he's done an about face and said, wait a second. We have these hubs, but there actually might be not creative hubs. They might actually be destroying the culture that exists in those cities. So I put this up there in case anyone goes into urban. This would be sort of a good thing to use if you were going into urban. I don't go in this direction, but someone else might. I would only go in this direction if students took me in this direction, and then I could find my way through him and then back again. So not every class unfolds in exactly the same way. So is educational attainment across the US really that unequal? So now we can look at it in terms of, this is from WalletHub, but they actually got their statistics from BLS. So here we look at comparisons of high schools, right? Highest percentage of high school diploma holders, highest percentage of associate degree holders. Compare the top 5 here to the bottom 5. My students don't like this because they're in Southern California, and California doesn't even make any of the lists on the left right now. So all they see is all the bad news, right? Salinas, Visalia, Bakersfield. And then I tell them, but it's only 2 times, right? They're only 2 times greater. But then we move to higher ed, and here's where we begin to see, and this is where we can kind of make connections, what Moretti is talking about in terms of the hubs. Now we see all those hubs right here, right? They're all presented in the percentage of bachelor's degree holders, and again, reproduced right here in the percentage of graduate and professional degree holders. And then California appears, so everyone gets really excited, but not so excited because Los Angeles doesn't show up. And then over here, these are the lower ends, and still we have California on the lower end. So within California, there's really is a high discrepancy. I think I mentioned that it was Merced, I think 11% of the population, 11% of those 22 years of age or older or have a college degree. And if you compare it to something like maybe San Jose or San Francisco, that's closer to 55%. So there's a tremendous difference there. All right, but they also, this is kind of a friendly way. They're actually looking, they're absorbing data and knowing that they can get information to support what it is they might think, but in a way that's not so intimidating. This means, yes, I know we've been here before, but this is where we started. So remember, what we're really trying to do is we're ultimately trying to develop the cause and effect relationships between unemployment or employment and degree, and between education and earnings. All right, so this is another St. Louis Fed. This is GeoFred. And what basically this allows you to do is it allows you to zero in on the data. So here's unemployment in California. The problem is when I zoom in too much, it loses some of the cities, but you get the general idea. So the question for students is, does the unemployment and education match up in California? And we realize, yeah, that's one of the ones where they said there were really low levels of education, and that unemployment rate's at 10.6, whereas if you look at San Jose or San Francisco, we have 3.9, and this is 2017 data. So you're keeping them up to date on the data. The data is not intimidated. The data is on a graph, so they're, in addition to seeing the data, they're also seeing the geographical location, because coastals in California can also make a difference. Right? That might not be true across the country, but in California it matters. And so then I usually give them an assignment on this, and basically it's unemployment in your hometown. And I'd like to say that the assignment was completely my idea. It's there. I can't pull it up, but if you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to link to it. But the Fred, right, the St. Louis Fed, they did a, you may have seen it, they did an assignment called 10-10. And so I sort of follow that formatting. And so they look at unemployment in their statistical metropolitan area. They compare it to unemployment across California. They compare it to unemployment, at least the highs and the lows, across the country. And in the end, it's not that they have to hand in a lot, because see, one of the benefits here is in the end, you can design it so that if they did it all correctly, there's one graph that they have to submit. And you can establish whether that graph is correct or incorrect. You can also move it and take it in different directions. You can have an assignment around this, a writing assignment, another type of assignment, but I just do it for familiarize them with the data that they might be interested in, right? Here's just another portion of that. They can also look at the unemployment rate in their hometown over time, and you can have them talk about that. You can have them talk about it with respect to recessions, depending on where you are in the class. And then we are now moving on. Again, reminding you, and I wouldn't necessarily put this up for them, but I would be reminding them. So this is just what I might be telling them. Here's another. This is also from Economic Lowdown, which is the Federal Reserve website, but she is from the Atlanta Fed. And so the Atlanta Fed is on there, the St. Louis Fed, and Diego? The St. Louis Fed, the Atlanta Fed, and there's another Fed on there. They're all on there. So they all present different aspects of this. So she does a mini lesson on returns to education where she actually talks about human capital. Now, depending on how you approach this, you might put her before Moretti, if that made that organizational sense. I mean, I've done that with her before that, or you might put her right after that if you're trying to join two things together. But that would just be a matter of choice. And so here, when you get the PowerPoint, you could link on her, and it'll take you right to that site, but it might ask you to sign in. So the next thing here, we're looking at returns to education. Now we're just going to switch it up a little bit here. So I'm still focusing. They still kind of have data, right? And it's not that everything I do is data-driven. It's just that some of this data is exciting, and they're interested in it, so you have their attention for a slightly longer period of time, and you can go into a little bit more depth. So this is an article by Jonathan James on the college wage premium, where we can then say, you know, location might matter, your own individual attributes might matter, and a college degree might matter, but he basically makes the argument it's not just any college degree, but it's also your choice of major, and a more advanced degree might pay off as well. So here you get, hey, there's their writing to learn, that's what the WTL is. You can do a writing to learn right there in class, you know, a few minutes after they read it. Hey, what's the research question? What do you think he's really trying to explore? They don't have to get it right, because I'll talk about it anyway, but they get to put it down and to think about it. Over here, right, we come back to this. This is what he's trying to explore, and then we kind of go through the data systematically. We don't go through every piece of it, but we'll go through a couple of majors where if I have those majors in the class, I'll call on them and we'll go through their majors in a more systematic way. And so just to let you know, there's a writing to learn here, but all of this too, they might read it at home, but we'll still come back to it in class and we'll do this as an in-class assignment together and go through it. And if we have time, we'll go through an assignment where I ask them to sort of annotate in the margins, but I do that on the next one. Well, sorry. So yes, location matters, your own individual attributes matter, college degree matters, your major matters, but those are not the only things. Right? So now we go to Bureau of the Census for the purpose of getting the gender, ethnicity, and race breakdown. Right? So students also begin to see, okay, so now also we have other circumstances that come into play that also lead to different outcomes in terms of returns to education. So those are things that we have to pay attention to. And those are things that students will pay attention to if they are different race, different ethnicity, if they are women. Right? And so all of a sudden you're also talking to them. Right? You're not just talking generally as if they in particular don't matter. Now you're also paying attention to other factors. Now this can be QR is a quantitative reasoning. A quantitative reasoning assignment I would give might be asking them to zero in on particular data, and then I would ask them some questions about it. Right? How do they reason through it? Or I might ask them to focus in on a particular data and then go back to what we discussed previously and briefly describe how that data would support or refute what so-and-so said. I don't give them a lot, maybe just one data point, right? But now they've had the Fed, they've had BLS, and now they have Bureau of the Census, right? So they're familiar with, or at least can name, I don't know how familiar they are, but they can at least name 3 data sources. So now I use this. It doesn't have to be this, and sometimes I use this, and sometimes I use another one to then say, so what is the right education? Right, still talking about education, and this is Ethan Lewis, and actually I think he's a Fed person too. All those nicely written Fed articles for undergraduates. And so we talk about that a little bit. Here's the WTL, right? A quick WTL that they might do, which is, after reading this or this section, who do you think Lewis is most connected to? Or what part of his writing, you know, because he does talk about a lot of different things, I might pick on a section. Where would you link Lewis to? Who would you link him to? So then they start thinking about order. How do these authors actually, or these presenters actually talk to each other? Right? They would talk to each other in a particular order, and then you get them to start, you know, ordering things in ways that make sense, right? Sort of serial conversations. And then here, that's another sort of a heads up, making connections. I'm going to circle that because they should be connecting to Moretti and saying, okay, you know, he could have a conversation with Moretti because they can talk about, I have it right here, they could talk about geographical differences. All right? So again, put them in conversation with each other, connect them. Now here we're looking at Frank Levy. Again, what's the right education? And he would be talking about problem solving here. And so some of you with problem solving can go in a lot of different directions after you leave Levy. But Levy's also a good person because in addition to doing the problem solving, which is what that WTL is going to be, what does he actually mean by problem solving? And what they'll soon discover, or ultimately should discover, is that the problem solving is what's really hidden behind what Jonathan James is really talking about when he talks about why the returns to economics, for example, are higher than the returns to other concentrations that you might find in a business school. And it's largely because of the problem solving and the critical thinking skills that go along with the major. He doesn't make that explicit, but then you can use Frank Levy to make Jonathan James a little bit more explicit. And so that's kind of what we play with, just a little bit there. And then Levy also can go on to, if you want to talk about sort of jobs and trends, you can also take Levy into, technology and education and job loss and where that job loss is occurring and why that is the case. All right, this is Florida, but in a different way. This is actually looking at returns to some of those skills that they were talking about, those higher order skills. So you have the returns to social intelligence, and you have the returns to analytical skills. And you notice that as you become more social intelligence dense or more analytically skilled dense, there are higher returns to you. But if you're more physically skilled dense, then those rates of return are going to decline over time, right? So that's the poor news about men in the manufacturing sector, for example. And so this is sort of it might be a good way to start that conversation in where those jobs are getting lost and why. You can go to International from there, or in a lot of different directions too. Or you can just stay with the Frank Levy article and do a writing to learn assignment that's sort of much more general. Right? What does essentially that mean? Markets, like every other institution, rest on the consent of the participants. If enough people come to see the US labor job market as stacked against them, all the nation's institutions will be at risk. Right? That's really easy for a free write, for them to be thinking about that, right? Where they fit in the larger scheme of things. Right? And then, of course, the next thing, depending on what direction you want to go in, would be to actually be modeling this. Not to go into statistics and run a regression, but to come up with a, theoretical equation that might make a lot of sense to them. But I don't go there with my macro class, but one could go there. And hopefully I didn't go too quickly. It never really ends, but it's over now.